Chris Mannix covers the NBA. He's a senior reporter, writer for Sports Illustrated. And let me get your thoughts on the Bradley Beal trade from Phoenix's perspective.
On the surface, you get a player the caliber of Bradley Beal by giving up as little as they did. You would have to declare this a win. Bradley Beal, even though he's only played 90 games over the last 2 years, when he's right, is still a 25-ish point per game score. So you get that from Phoenix's perspective. But when you start really looking at the fit, there are some red flags there. Phoenix now has a team that is led by three guys that like the mid-range jump shot. You look at the number of mid-range jump shots Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant shoot, and it's a lot. They're effective scorers, but they do shoot a lot of mid-range jump shots. And you start to wonder if Beal and Devin Booker are somewhat repetitive, if they overlap with their skill set. So you're not exactly sure how they fit. And you also look at this deal, and you are now, if you're Phoenix, you're now all in with this group. Like, there's nobody. I mean, Devin Booker you could trade down the line because he's young enough and people want him. But you're not going to be able to trade Bradley Beal, whose no trade clause comes with him to Phoenix. Kevin Durant certainly could still be movable, but not for anywhere near the yield that they gave up to get him. This is your team for at least the next 3 or 4 years, and you're all in. There's almost no way you can substantially improve this group because you don't have draft picks and you don't have any kind of cap flexibility. That flexibility is going to go down in the years to come because the NBA, as you know, is making it a lot harder for teams to just free spend their way to success. So it's a deal that, on paper, you'd argue makes the Suns better, but I don't look at them as being better than Denver right now. And that for the next couple of years is going to be the bar in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I was curious about this, that you just added another scorer. They still have DeAndre Ayton. They don't have depth. And you have a lot of guys who do the same thing. They don't have defenders there, and you're facing a team, and I I capitalize team with Denver. That's a better all-around team. I don't know where Phoenix fits in now. If we, let's Golden State, are they better than Golden State? Are they better than the Lakers? Are they better than Memphis? I'm not quite sure. Did they improve their team? It looks different. It looks different. It looks sexy, but I don't know if they improved that much.
I think they improved in part because it was more likely than not that Chris Paul wasn't going to be on the team anyway at the start of next season. Landry Shamet is a decent rotation player, but you give up a 7th or 8th man to get a guy like Bradley Beal. They didn't have to include a first-round pick, largely because they don't have first-round picks. So a collection of seconds is not a steep price to pay for Bradley Beal. But look, I said I don't think they're better than Denver. You can make the argument that if the Warriors bring that band back, they're lesser than the Warriors. They're lesser than the Sacramento Kings right now, who I think will take a step forward next year. And look, when you're assessing Phoenix, we're doing it right now, assuming everything goes right health-wise, that these guys will be on the floor for 60, 65 games together. It's just as likely that doesn't happen. I mean, Beal's got his own history of injuries over the last 4 years, has not played more than 60 games in any of those seasons. Kevin Durant, we know his injury history. Devin Booker had an injury last year that kept him out of the lineup for a chunk of time. So you're committing $100+ million to these three guys who may or may not be able to play the entirety of a season. Now, you mentioned DeAndre Ayton. That's the guy teams are watching over the next few days. I don't think that Phoenix can get equal value back in return for DeAndre Ayton, but they might be able to flip him for a couple of role players, the kind of guys that would flesh out the roster and give them a little bit more depth, which they're sorely lacking at the moment. It would be tough. Like, Frank Vogel has told me, he wants to coach DeAndre Ayton. If you look at Frank Vogel's teams that have had the most success they have been anchored by a defensive-minded big. Whether that's Roy Hibbert in Indiana, Anthony Davis, Dwight Howard during the championship season in Los Angeles. Frank has a defensive strategy that kind of requires a player like DeAndre Ayton. But if the Suns can find a deal that would net them 2 or 3 valuable role players, that's a deal I think they'd strongly consider.
Now, Washington's side of this, it just feels like there's certain teams that are feeder teams to make other teams better. Washington, I think, went down that road with Bradley Beal, and they were basically stuck. Nobody cares about that franchise. No, there's no relevancy with them. It's like Charlotte or Orlando, where it's like, hey, we got a good player, and we're going to let him go. So what's the future of the Washington Wizards?
I can't think of a more catastrophic finish to an era for a quote-unquote star player than Bradley Beal. I mean, they extended him, or they gave him a new contract when everyone knew this was going to happen. Like, the idea that Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, and Kristaps Porzingis was going to be able to contend for anything was just insane. I mean, everybody knew it at the time, but the Wizards, for some reason, were just so hell-bent on becoming a playoff team, just a playoff team, that they're willing to give Bradley Beal $250 million and a no-trade clause to get him to stick around. And then they go out and swing a deal. And look, Michael Winger, the new top executive there, he knew what the score was. He knew they had to move on from Bradley Beal. And we all knew, Dan, that the price for Bradley Beal was going to be pretty low, for all the reasons we mentioned: the contract, the no-trade clause, the fact that he has not looked like the same player over the last couple of seasons that he was in that 2021 year where he averaged 30-plus points per game. All that said, they gave him away. They gave him away. Yeah. What they got out of this deal was getting off that contract. And that made me wonder, was it absolutely necessary to deal Bradley Beal right now? They didn't get a first-round pick back, so it's not like the draft was, this deadline that they had for him. To me, I thought maybe it would have been better to kind of play this thing out over the next couple of months, and maybe even play this thing out into next season to see if the market opens up a little bit more, and to see if Bradley Beal, because of a desire to get out of Washington, would have expanded his list of teams that he'd be willing to go to. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, the Wizards have been dealing with basically 4 teams, maybe 5, who Bradley Beal would have considered waiving his no-trade clause. You go into next season, and maybe Brad's looking around going, I want to win something. This team might give me an opportunity. Let's add that team to the list, or let's add that team to the list. Because right now, the only thing Washington got for Bradley Beal, really, tangibly, was the flexibility that comes with getting off the final 4 years of that contract.
And then Chris Paul, it's probably I don't think he's buying in Washington D.C. I'm going to guess he doesn't even get to Washington D.C.
Well, yes. There's going to be a lot of pressure. Look, the reason this deal is not official is because right now Washington and Phoenix are looking for that third team to facilitate Chris Paul. They're seeing if it's out there. I don't know that it is. It's complicated because of Chris Paul's salary. There are certainly teams that want him. Do they want him at the $30-ish million that he'd be due to be paid next year? I don't know if there's an answer to that question, but that's why this deal is still in kind of the stages where it's not officially done yet. If they can't find a third team and this becomes a 2-team deal, there will be pressure on the Wizards to just waive Chris Paul. I think that would be a mistake, because if they waive Chris Paul, what do they gain from that? Saving a few extra bucks because you don't have to give him the full amount of his contract. Does that really matter to Ted Leonsis at this stage? Chris Paul will want the freedom to choose a contender to go to this summer. I don't blame him for that. But if I'm Washington, why not bring him to training camp? Why not, bring him into the start of next season for the exact same reasons I said the Wizards should have considered bringing Bradley Beal back? What do you have to lose? You bring him in, maybe he comes in phenomenal shape, maybe he helps you win a few games in the first 6 weeks of the season, and then maybe a team's out there that goes, wow, Chris Paul can still play.
Mm.
Let's give you a protected first-round pick for him and a couple of expiring contracts to get you there. I just don't see the upside for Washington in just letting Chris Paul go. I mean, I understand that teams like to do this to show they're player friendly, to show that we'll work with you in situations like this, but how often does that benefit teams in the long term? I mean, I think Washington's got to be looking out for Washington in this situation. And if they think that bringing Chris Paul to camp might be able to get them an asset in December or January, they should do it.
Talking to Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated senior NBA writer. I'll leave you with this. What are the chances Victor Wembanyama isn't great?
I mean, 0.0001, I would say. I've got a chance to watch a lot of his games this year on the NBA app. And by the way, full credit to Victor Wembanyama in a basketball prospect landscape where guys play as few games as possible before they go into the NBA draft. Victor Wembanyama is out there like last week, competing at the highest level in his league. There's nothing he can't do, Dan. He's not a high percentage 3-point shooter just yet, but he's a teenager who already shoots high 20s from three and, is going to develop that part of his game. And it's going to grow significantly over the next couple of years. I just think within 2 or 3 years, we're going to be looking at a highly effective two-way player. And within 3 to 5 years, we might be looking at the most dominant player in the NBA. I just think his skill set is that diverse, and his ability to grow, like the parts of his game that can still develop. I think he's just going to be really special.
Thank you, Chris.
You got it, Dan.
That's Chris Mannix, senior writer for Sports Illustrated.